What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and today we are moving on. We aren't doing a Kiss review series anymore. We aren't doing Kiss rankings anymore. We're going to start going over my favorite albums by year. And the decade we're doing right now is my favorite decade for music, possibly the 70s. And personally, from 74, 75 to 78, if I could only pick a time frame for music, that would be very high up there. But I have favorites all through this decade, and we're going to start out with 1970. For the early part of the decade, it was pretty easy to find my top 10, top 5, whatever albums I chose to do. Whereas in the middle and towards the end, it was a lot tougher because there's so many albums from that little window in the mid-70s that I could easily put on a list. And my list is really in no particular order. I'm just naming albums that I like. I'll be sure to clarify which one I find is my favorite or ones I like a little more, but this isn't just a set in stone. This is my top 10 from worst to best. This is just albums from that year that I really liked. And please don't be a stickler in the comments if this is something where this album was actually released in Australia a year before and then released in Canada, whatever. I'm just going off the internet and the time frames that I know albums were released. Just remember, it's only a video. That's enough rambling. Coming up first for my top albums of 1970 is Supertramp's debut album. And technically this wasn't released in the US until 1977, but this album was released after they already had some hits and they finally put it out in the US. And this was one of the first vinyls that my dad ever gave me. He was looking through his old stuff and he had a couple records that I guess he didn't throw out or forgot about. And this was one of them I grabbed. And I always liked Breakfast in America, so I was kind of expecting that style from them when I put this record on. But it is a much different side of Supertramp. If you don't really like that poppy kind of esque sound, high pitch, it's a much different sound. Very underrated album, and that is definitely a deep dive of the 70s that I recommend checking out. This is one that's not on the radar, but it is a great album. Coming up next, and this band actually had 2 albums this year, and I narrowed it down to 1, and that is CCR, Cosmo's Factory. And I picked this album because it has more songs that I actually like. Like, I heard it through the grapevine as one of my all-time favorites, Long As I Can See the Light. Love those songs. And then you got the bigger hits, like Run Through the Jungle, Up Around the Bend, Who'll Stop the Rain, Looking Out My Back Door. So, from top to bottom, you can get your big CCR hits, and you can get some little deeper tracks in there that don't really get as much radio play or attention. Solid album. Up next, I've got Band of Gypsys by Jimi Hendrix. This is a New Year's live album for 1970 that was recorded at the Fillmore East. With this album, he got rid of Mitch Mitchell and did some new live tracks, and this is where you get songs that people kind of hail him for, like Machine Gun. And this album wasn't necessarily praised at the time per se, but looking back on it, it has some stronger hits, and I get to look at it in hindsight, obviously, because I was born well after this album came out, and I have a lot of fun listening to it. It's a solid album. It's only got 6 tracks on it, but they are great, and you're getting some strong musicianship, not just from him, but from the band itself. It's a fun listen and really encapsulates the style of Hendrix that I like. Up next, I have Paul McCartney's debut solo album, just titled McCartney. Maybe I'm Amazed alone would put this in my top 10. And I'm not a big Beatles guy. I like some of their songs. I don't really deep dive them. They just never really been my thing. And I actually get more enjoyment from a lot of their solo stuff than I do from the Beatles themselves. Up next is a band that I got into recently. I would say, honestly, probably in the last year. They were a band I always heard about, but I never cared to listen to them. I'd heard a song or two, and I just never was a deadhead. But American Beauty by the Grateful Dead. Once I sat down and listened to them, I got so much enjoyment from this album. I had a playlist going while I was working one day, and Friend of the Devil came on, and I've heard versions of it, but I'd never heard their version. And when I heard it, I had to go look and see who was singing it, and it was in fact the Grateful Dead, which made me decide to go and check this album out. And then you get songs like Ripple, you get songs like Box of Rain. Tons of good tracks on this album once I decided to sit down and listen to it. This band coming up next is one I'd heard 1 or 2 songs from before that weren't on this album, and they're all right. Again, a band that I don't really look for, but as an album as a whole, I think this is a phenomenal album, and that is The Kinks' Lola vs. Power Man and the Money Go Round Part 1, which is hands down one of the worst album titles I have ever heard, but I do like the album cover. I always liked the song Lola. That was a favorite song of mine, and it still is a favorite song of mine, and I never took the time to listen to the album till a couple years back, and I sat down and actually gave it a listen, and there is definitely some solid tracks, and they have a style that I really liked with this album. But Lola, for me, is the track. I love that song. It is catchy. I honestly listen to it every few days. As someone who is a southern rock fan, this is a band that, for whatever reason, I never gave too much time to. I liked Skynyrd and Hatchet and the Outlaws and stuff like that. And I had a few songs I liked by the Allman Brothers. And I knew the hits, like I knew Midnight Rider, Idlewild South by the Allman Brothers. I had heard a song in a Dale Earnhardt movie once called Please Call Home. Never knew who sang it. I looked that song up, found it was on this album, put the whole album on, and it is just phenomenal top to bottom. But Please Call Home, that is a song that would put this in a top 10 for this year alone. I love that song to death. There's just so much emotion in his voice. It's nice and somber. It really has some sort of emotional connection to me. I love that song, and I'm glad that I love that song because it led me to a great album. Now we're getting into three that are above the rest. I've really love and enjoy all the other albums I've mentioned, but these three are the ones that take that top spot for sure without question. They're kind of locked in, probably in the order I'm about to read them, and that is Paranoid by Black Sabbath. And I could have easily went with the self-titled album, but whenever I looked track for track of the ones I like the most, I had to go with Paranoid. I mean, you get War Pigs, Paranoid, Planet Caravan, and Iron Man just on side A of the vinyl alone. Great album. And their self-titled album is fantastic. I can remember hearing that intro even as a kid, years removed from when that album came out, which I'm sure was aggressive and terrifying then. As a kid, listening to that pouring rain and that riff come in. But Paranoid by Black Sabbath can be put on start to finish by me and just on repeat. I have such a fun time with that album. You get the hits, you get the classic Sabbath feel. Phenomenal album. In second place is another album that I've reached into within the last year, maybe even 8 months. Within a year, and that is Fire and Water by Free. I liked All Right Now. It would shuffle on my playlist. That's always a catchy song. Really had fun with it, and I just decided to check out the whole album just to see what was up. I like Bad Company, so I like his voice. I was like, let me check out more of Free, see how I feel about that. A lot of these albums in the early 70s were ones that I found one song that I liked and randomly decided to listen to the whole album and fell in love with it, and this is the epitome of that. I heard that song forever. I knew it. I heard it now and then, which I love that movie. For whatever reason, I just decided to shuffle the album on and was so happy with what I got from it that it immediately has taken over my listening in the last year. I put it on all the time now, and I wish it was something I would have known about before. But number one, easily, when I looked at everything released in 1970, and I had a feeling this one was going to be up towards the top before I even looked at other albums released, and that is Led Zeppelin 3. I mean, come on, dude. It's Led Zeppelin. Immigrant Song, Friends, Celebration Day, Since I've Been Loving You, Tangerine, one of my all-time favorite Led Zeppelin songs ever. You're getting all these songs on the same album. I can read the whole track. Gallows Pole, That's the Way. It's just top to bottom is so stacked. You have the hits, but you have the deeper tracks that don't get as much radio play. Again, Tangerine does not get radio play, at least where I live, ever. You never hear it. But my God, I love that song so much. That is in my top 5 Zeppelin songs, without a doubt. And I'll be honest, guys, the year 1970, I didn't know too many albums coming in off of this. So I've been looking up lists for every year of the top 50 rock albums released that year, and I pick and choose ones I find. And it was a little easy to choose this list because there wasn't too many that I was super familiar with that I had a strong feeling about. But all the albums that came out in this year had their own style, and that's what's kind of cool about listening and doing this review series. From the start of the 70s to the end, you can hear the different changes throughout the decade, from the early 70s where you're coming off that 60s to the mid 70s where you're getting that Detroit rock sound, where you're getting Nugent, you can get Skynyrd, and you can get everything that you want. Kiss, Aerosmith, AC/DC, all these things, taking you to the end of the 70s where you can add punk rock in, you can get some early new wave stuff in there. It's just really cool to see that progression, and I'm glad I sat down to do this review series. We just kicked it off. Let me know your favorite albums from 1970 down below. I want to hear what your thoughts are. Tell me some underrated gems I've never heard of, because I'll be honest, I'm pretty unfamiliar with that early 70s era. So give me some underrated albums I've never heard. Love to know, guys. Put your thoughts down below. Like, comment, subscribe. We got more coming. Next video, we are talking 1971. You guys are the best. Peace.